I'm Jeanette Keynes from Jewelry Arts Inc. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to polish out some little scratches and rough spots on a garnet that's been worn for a really long time. You may remember this garnet from when I unset it from a ring, resetting it into a new piece, and it was worn for many years. And most stones, unless they're like super hard like a diamond, if you wear them for a long time, they will start to get little dull spots or scratches. So I'm going to show you how to fix it with some really pretty low-tech methods. So here's my juicy little garnet that I unset. It looks lovely, but you can see if you, let's see here if I can show that off. You see that from where it has some scratches on the surface, which, you see that right there? I'm gonna try to fix. I'm not like an expert lapidary, but I know a little bit about polishing and things like that. And I've cut a couple stones in my day. Not something I do every day by any means, but when it's like this and it's going back in the piece, I really want it to look its best. So what I'm gonna do is show you guys a really pretty easy and low-tech way that you can polish up your stones yourself if you get a little scratch or the shine comes off in a little spot, because that's pretty common. And not everybody has like a lapidary shop that they can just send their stuff out to conveniently. We have places here in the city, although sometimes, you know, it can be a little tricky because I've had them remove too much. So usually if it's just a matter of cleaning up a little scratch or two and putting the shine back in, I'd rather do it myself. So I'm going to show you how to do it with low-tech stuff. There you go, that shows you a better view. See those little scratches and whatnot? Those are what I'm going to work on and smooth out and shine up again. Now, garnet is a pretty hard stone, but almost any stone with a little wear and tear will get some scratches and scuffs, so it's kind of to be expected. See that? It's primarily along the top, you know, obviously where it gets hit when it's worn. So if I'm going to clean up these little scratches and smooth it out and everything, I really need a handle for this, in other words. And so we're going to use a dopstick, which is, in this case, a nail, but it could be a wood stick or anything. And basically we're going to use dop wax to attach the stone to my stick. Now, dopping wax it's a type of sealing wax, basically, that melts at a relatively low temperature. People will also use things like shellac and whatnot. The dop wax is just sort of like easy and inexpensive, and as long as you're a little careful with it, you don't burn your fingers, you know, it works great. Because what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna heat the end of my little stick and I'm gonna get some of the dop wax on there, and here's some of the dop wax, by the way. It just comes in this big green stick. And then a lot of times too, we melt it into a little, it was probably originally a tuna can, I don't know, a little metal container, so that I can take this and kind of sweep it in there and get a little, you know, like a little pad on here that then I can stick to the stone. Now, before you dop a stone, you have to understand your stone and how heat sensitive it is. Things like opals you wouldn't want to heat up at all, but things like garnet and whatnot, usually they can take, as long as you're gentle and you don't shock it, they can take a little heat. So when I get the dop on here, all prepared, which I'll show you, I'm gonna gently heat my stone just a little bit and stick the wax on there. So just remember, the most important thing when you're using your dop wax is that it won't stick to anything that's very shiny or hard or whatever, or wet like your steel block, but it will stick to your fingers, which are warm and porous. So anytime you're going to touch the dop wax, if it's warm, you have to make sure to dip your fingers in some water, my water bowl right here, so that it doesn't stick to me and burn. Because you know that kind of thing where it really clings to you is not pleasant when it burns. So don't let that happen to you. So I think first I'm just going to drip a little bit of it down in here. There's a bunch of wax in here already, but some of it looks a little dark, like it's been perhaps a little over fried. So I'm gonna, and I mean, once you really burn the wax, it loses a lot of its resiliency. So I'm gonna put a little fresh layer of this on top. And ideally when you're melting it, if you see a tiny bit of smoke, like stop, because you're not trying to catch it on fire. You're trying to just gently melt. isn't always easy to be lovely and patient. So try to be nice with it. Now this stone is not super enormous, so it's not like I need a giant amount of this on the end. Honestly, probably just a little bit bigger than the end of the nail itself anyway, but I'm just gonna drip some down in here so that I have whatever I need. Okay, so you see how now I have a cute little puddle of not too singed wax. One more drop. There we go. And like I said, because it won't stick to the steel block, you can use that to just sort of press it like that. Okay. Now, in order for it to stick to the steel little nail here, I'm going to warm up the steel a little bit. Like so. And you see how I can just kind of pick some up on there like that? And then I'll warm this up a little bit. And I'll dip it in there again. Like I said, I actually don't need an enormous amount. And that's why I have the steel block right here, because I can press it. I don't want this to like drip down on my hand because it really doesn't feel too good when it does that. So I'm just gonna make like a cute little covering on the end. What I'm trying to do is make it more or less the same basic shape as my stone, so that I won't have too much work to do to shape it on there. See what I mean? Cute little thing like that. Maybe I'll fool around with it a little bit more, but honestly that's more because I'm OCD than any other real reason. And I'm just melting it down on here that I feel reasonably sure, you know, that I'm getting good adhesion on my nail. Okay, see that? Looks pretty good. If I wanted also, I can get this hot and dip my fingers in water and shape it a little bit, but like I was saying before, just be careful if you do that. Just want a little more poof on the end. That looks nice. Should do. I can always pop it right in the water just to cool it off fast. Although honestly, I'm just going to warm it right back up again. But I want to be able to safely kind of hold it and look at it and just make sure everything's what I want it to be. Yep, that'll do. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my lovely little garnet and I am going to heat it up just a little. It doesn't need to be like super hot, but the Dop wax won't really stick to it if it isn't warm. So I'm going to have my bowl of water right here. Because normally what I try to do is I just heat the stone just a little and heat this and like, you know, dip, have it drop, you know, a little piece or two on there, and then I'll stick it on. And I'll dip my fingers in the water and shape it with my fingers. And this is definitely not a case for like blasting away. See how I'm gently heating my stone. And you'll know if you didn't get it warm enough because the wax won't stick to it. Go. Drip a little bit more. And you know, this makes a great handle. Normally at the very end when we're all done, I stick the whole thing in the freezer to make it really kind of brittle and kind of just pop it off with my finger. I mean, I guess you could also like heat it and pull it off of there, but using the cold is usually a little easier, cleaner, and less risk of burning yourself. Okay, so I'm going to turn my torch off. Notice my fingers are nice and wet. And shape the dop wax around. I'm really working on this top surface, so it's not like I'm gonna need to really work down here because the sides were protected by the bezel when this was being worn. And fortunately for me, I didn't scratch it at all when I was unsetting it. So we just have to really concentrate on this top section. So I think I may heat it a tiny bit over here to kind of seal it up on there. And I try to get it on pretty straight because I'm gonna be hand holding this, and usually if things start off crooked, it's just sort of hard to figure out where you are. All right, yeah, I'm gonna heat that just like a tiny bit more and fuss with it. I don't think it'll come off, but. Okay, so I think that looks good and is held on there reasonably level. So basically I'm gonna let this come to room temperature and then I'll show you how we polish it. So you see there it is, all lovely and stuck on its dopstick. So pretty much, and room temperature it would appear. So I'm ready to start polishing. So lapidary is a whole big topic of its own. However, there are a few basic compounds you can use to like put the shine back on something and get rid of a little bit of fine scratches. So there's chrome oxide, which is this bright green stuff right here, which I'm not even gonna open the bag because it does stain and get everywhere. Just waiting for the ambulance to pass. There's also something called cerium oxide. It's this sort of like peachy stuff right here. That's good for getting the shine back on something when you not for deep scratches or anything. This is primarily, like I said, just to like, you know, bring a little shine back if you've got it. Like the chrome oxide here, the green stuff, that's really good for softer stones and like enamels, you know, that'll like clean up a scratch beautifully. Now, my stone is a garnet, and garnet does best with aluminum oxide. So I have a little bit of the powder here. Now, a lot of people do not have lapidary equipment. So what I'm gonna show you is just sort of the down home method, which is a nice piece of leather. I'm gonna take some of this powder, put it on the leather, a little bit of water, make a slurry, and I'm gonna go rub back and forth. Now, if you have equipment that you can use to polish this, then great, do that. Just make sure not to get your stone too hot. Normally you use some kind of like felt buff, you know, and it spins and you put the compound on it and the water and you keep it wet and you know, like keep it moving around and around to polish it. But like I said, I'm trying to show you something that's a little more low tech. So if you don't have all of that equipment, you can still kind of clean up, you know, a little scratch and put the shine back on something, you know, if it's not so shiny anymore, because sometimes, you know, wear happens and scratches happen. And like I said, I don't consider myself a lapidary expert by any means, but it's really good to be empowered, you know, and be able to just like, oh, a little scratch. Okay, let me clean that up. I like to have the power of all the choices. So I'm going to take some aluminum oxide. I'm going to put a little water on the leather, and I'm going to spill a little bit of this on here and just like make a slurry. And granted, if you were using a lapidary wheel or whatever, this would go faster. But sometimes, honestly, when you're doing stuff like this, you know, fast isn't better. Fast just sometimes means you can fuck it up faster. So with things where you really want to just like do a little and look at it and do a little and look at it, it's really not a bad thing to do it by hand. So you see, it's wet. I made a little puddle there. And as it gets too dry, I'll just keep adding water. The water just helps everything to move around. It also helps to keep the stone cool. Now, granted, if you're doing this by hand, I can also just dip it in my little water bowl like that. You're not as worried about overheating. You know, when you're doing stuff on a wheel, it can be easy to do a little too much. So I'm just going to keep this wet, and I'm going to kind of go around and around. Now you saw that my scratches were mainly like on the top, you know, right where it was getting hit. So I'm going to keep adding water and rubbing it to smooth things out, and then I'll rinse it off and just check it. Probably not done yet, but I'm going to check anyway. So basically I wipe it off, and then my scratches are still in there. These are a little bit deep, so this is probably going to take a little more quality rubbing. As far as the leather goes, I usually just get mine from, there's like a Science and Surplus place, American Science and Surplus, that I get a lot of odds and ends like this. This is just relatively thick leather, which is what I wanted. Something nice and cushy. Another thing you can do is you can take a Sharpie or a scriber or something and sort of mark right on the dop wax where your scratches are, because once you're in here and everything's all sloopy, you might sort of lose track of where you are. So if you need to mark it, there's nothing wrong with that. So that I can see my scratches are definitely getting finer and less noticeable. So I'll try to do a little close-up of this so you can see a little better. I'm not done yet, but progress. So hopefully you can see. You see how the area that I've been rubbing is kind of smoothing out. And look, these scratches are a little deep, I'm not going to lie to you. So it is demanding some serious elbow grease. But most of the time you're cleaning up a little tiny scratch or a little dull spot. You're not doing quite this much. But you see that? It's kind of sort of blending together. That's what we're looking for. Because basically once that surface all looks sort of the same, then I'll go maybe even to something a little finer. So just to show you a little close-up, you can see I still have a few like little hazier areas, you know, where I had deeper scratches. So I'm gonna keep going, but we've got a lot of improvement there. You see that little dull area toward the top? I'm gonna have to sort of tilt everything and really work that area. But progress. And like I was saying, this had actually relatively deep scratches. Most of the time that you're doing this kind of thing, you're really just getting rid of a little scratch or a little dull area or something like that. This is not really meant for like hardcore lapidary, although I guess you would develop very strong arm muscles. So if you do have a flex shaft, of course, you don't have to use the leather and elbow grease method. You can always get one of these little felt buffs, a little water, put the compound on there to put the shine back on. I've almost got the stone back to its full glory. I'm gonna do a little bit more, but just remember, if you're using the flex shaft and felt buff, just make sure that you don't let it get too hot. You know what I mean? You want to like keep it wet and everything. You don't want to like let the heat build up too much because your stone might not like that. So you see, here's my little felt buff. I've got my little cup here with my aluminum oxide and a little water, and I'm putting it on here and polishing away. You see, it's pretty shiny, but there's still a few areas that are a little dull that need a little more love. So I'm gonna like keep working on it, but I am close-ish to it being smoothed out. Here's the update. My garnet is now glossy and beautiful. See what I mean? Not a scratch in sight, one hopes. So what I did was, as soon as I felt very, very happy with this, I put the whole thing in the freezer for 5 or 10 minutes, and then I just took my thumb and kind of popped it right off of there, because just like the dop wax will stick to anything that's warm and porous, if it's made to be very, very cooled, it gets quite brittle, and usually I can just take my finger and kind of pop the stone right off, which is what I did. So you can see it's ready now for the next stage of its life.